host of Wonders Without Number. In each episode, we talk about breaking discoveries in science, which reveal that our Creator, the God of the Bible, has left a pattern of His fingerprints throughout the universe. Check out our other resources at davidrives.com. Sign up for email updates to have encouraging nuggets sent straight to your inbox. Subscribe to our free monthly magazine and like us on Facebook for daily inspiration and education regarding science and the Bible. Did Charles Darwin admit to being a liar from a young age? Discover the dark side of Darwin on Wonders Without Number. Welcome to Wonders Without Number. I'm David Rives, and today we want to inform and inspire you regarding the wonders we find all around us. An infinite number of wonders that point us directly to our Creator, the God of the Bible. You're no accident. I want you to know that you are special, that you were created in God's own image, that Jesus Christ was and is that Creator, and that He has a plan for your life. Now, our mind is an incredible thing, and I believe that our morality comes from a higher power, the God of the Bible. I want to explore this idea and contrast it with an evolutionary perspective. Let's take a look right now. Why should you believe in creation and not evolution? I mean, scientifically speaking, haven't we proven that evolution is a fact? Well, the word evolution can mean a lot of different things today. One way it's frequently used is to describe the supposed process by which a single-celled organism slowly over millions of years turned into every living thing we see today. This is probably what most people think of when they hear evolution. Now, if this idea is true, then everything had to have evolved at some point, including immaterial things such as human moral consciousness. But this poses a question. You see, evolution is supposedly a naturalistic process that works on material such as DNA. So how does a completely naturalistic process evolve moral consciousness, something that's completely immaterial? This question is a puzzle for many evolutionists. William Provine, an evolutionist and biology professor at Cornell University, once said that one of the implications of evolution is that no ultimate foundations for ethics exist, no ultimate meaning in life exists, and free will is merely a human myth. So if humans are just the product of evolution, we're nothing more than highly evolved animals. And our brains are nothing more than chemical reactions. So how can anyone hold someone accountable for simply behaving according to chemical reactions in their brain? But human experience clearly shows us that we should be held accountable for our actions. Most evolutionists would agree that if someone murders another person, he should be punished. The question is why? If man is nothing more than another animal, how can we be held accountable? After all, no one punishes a lion for killing a gazelle or an eagle for snatching a trout from a stream. What makes humans so different? Some evolutionists will argue that society defines morality. For example, as an American society, we've decided that murder is wrong, so it's wrong. But this can't be correct. Other societies, such as Nazi Germany or radical Islamic groups today, believe that murder is perfectly acceptable if it accomplishes their purpose. To be consistent with the idea that ethics are decided by a society, an evolutionist would have to admit that murder is okay for these societies, but just not for ours. We intrinsically know that murdering millions of people in death camps or detonating bombs and killing civilians is morally wrong. Morality simply can't be decided by what a society thinks. A consistent evolutionist would have to admit that there's no such thing as a universal moral ethic in his ideology. And yet most evolutionists certainly would not admit to this. They're being inconsistent with their worldview. But the creation worldview does not have this problem. The Bible, the Word of our Creator, Yeshua of Nazareth, provides a foundation for morality. We were created in the image of God. We're not animals. As our Creator, only God has the right to set the rules, and He holds us accountable to them. In the book of Romans, we read that God has put His law in our hearts. In other words, we have moral consciousness because God's law is in our hearts. The Bible also explains why no one can live a perfectly moral life and why we see death and suffering. In the book of Genesis, we read that God created a perfect world. But the first people, Adam and Eve, rebelled against God. They introduced sin into the world, and now we all sin and fail to live up to God's law. But Jesus Christ, our Messiah, stepped into history living a perfect, sinless life and died on the cross, taking the penalty for our sin upon Himself. He then rose from the dead and offers forgiveness and eternal life to all who will believe. The evolutionary, naturalistic worldview cannot account for the existence of morality. But creation, as we find in the Bible, explains why we have a moral conscience, why it's broken, and why we can have hope, and where we can find forgiveness. Just one more scientific reason that you shouldn't believe in molecules to man evolution. It takes a lot of faith. I'm David Rives. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God. When it comes to morality, the Ten Commandments are a great place to start. They provide basic, simple instructions on how to love the Lord and how to treat our neighbor. You can tell a lot about an individual by their values. What if we ask questions about Charles Darwin's values? My guest today is waiting to share information on this topic. Dr. Jerry Bergman has taught biology, biochemistry, anatomy, genetics, and psychology in universities around the country. He has 9 degrees, including a PhD from Wayne State University. With over 1,000 publications to his name, including over 20 books, his work has been translated into 13 different languages. So if you would, please join with me as we welcome Dr. Jerry Bergman. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes, sir. It's great to have you here. And this is a topic that you're pretty passionate about. In fact, you've published a book called The Dark Side of Charles Darwin, a critical analysis of an icon of science. And he is an icon, isn't he?
Oh, yeah.
He has done so much within the scientific community, but he's damaged it in many ways.
Yeah, he has.
Let's take a look at this man.
And I could mention, and people would disagree with my first few sentences, and that's good. I hope this gets into the book and you do the research. But there's a list of candidates of most evil man in history, and of course Hitler's in there, and Stalin's in there, and Mao's in there, and so on. My conclusion, ironically, is Darwin.
Wow.
And Darwin is the most evil man in history. Now, I'm not saying he was because as his personal, he was a good father, he was a good husband, typically, at least back for his day. And he didn't kill anybody that I know, he didn't rob any banks, he didn't do any of the evil stuff that we're thinking about. But in many ways, because he was a good man in his personal life, his effect has been therefore profound because, well, we can't look at his personal life and see any flaws that we think about, like robbing banks or swindling people and so on. But the effect of his ideas has been well beyond those people. When I present this material, people say, well, you shouldn't say unkind things about people. Well, how about Hitler? Can I say unkind? Oh, yeah, you can say all you want about him, that's unkind. Stalin, the same thing, and Mao, the same thing. Well, in many ways, the story of Charles Darwin is such where his effect has been far more adverse historically than these other people. Hitler did a lot of harm, no question. That's not a problem.
But who paved the way for some of Hitler's thought patterns?
And of course it was Charles Darwin, and that's the critical thing we have to keep in mind. And Darwin influenced not only, of course, Hitler, but also Stalin. In fact, there's a good documentation on how he influenced Stalin. Stalin was in seminary, by the way, and Stalin started reading about the Darwinian ideas and related, and eventually became an atheist, and of course became one of the most evil men in history. Not the most evil, but one of the most evil.
Yes.
And Charles Darwin, I would say, would earn that honor, if you can call that. And the result of his work, and these statistics we have to be careful reading, because different people calculate them in different ways, but a pretty good source is the World Christian Encyclopedia, published by Oxford University Press, and they conclude about 45.5 million Christians have been martyred in the last century alone. And the main cause of that was Nazism and, of course, communism.
Okay.
And the dead total now this is Christian martyrs, the first part. But
Okay.
those who were killed specifically because of communism and Nazism, we're talking about Jews and Slavics and so on,
Okay.
about 167 million.
That's a lot.
And that is a huge. What is the population of the United States today? 320 million?
Right.
So almost half the population of the entire United States died.
It's hard to believe.
And this number, I think, is low. I think the actual number is higher. When we look at disease, famine, from deaths from injuries, destruction of property, it's even greater.
Okay.
There's hardly anyone that was not affected by World War II.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's why we call it World War II. It's not just a local war, but
It
it's
had
World War II.
global effect.
Global effects. And there is Charles Darwin. And when you look at these pictures, when I look at them, you see what? Well, what do you see? A happy man?
It is very grim, very dark, it seems. I don't know.
Very angry.
Yeah.
He looks very, very angry. And that maybe says something about him. What was his major goal? Well, his major goal was to develop his idea to replace God, to murder God, as he himself said once in a letter. And to develop a theory to murder God, well, you need a theory that's religious. God explains the existence of creation. Therefore, to develop a theory, another theory that explains the existence of creation, that by definition would also be religious. Or as I prefer to use the term, worldview. So religion gives us a worldview, and Darwin gave us a worldview.
Okay.
And there was Darwin as a young man and his sister. He was from a wealthy family, and his goal was, of course, to replace God, and actually his theory became a God, and he himself said that in one of his statements. And for example, one, I speak of natural selection as an active power or deity.
So natural selection is his God, basically.
His God. It's a deity. And of course, natural selection is what? Elimination of the weak.
Right.
So natural selection is killing.
Okay.
And he added, I would give absolutely nothing for the theory of natural selection if it requires miraculous additions at any one stage of descent, which would make my deity, natural selection, superfluous. And so what is he saying here? Clearly, he's talking about theistic evolution doesn't work in his worldview.
Okay.
He's saying
This has to completely replace.
completely right. And so when you try to create a combination of theism and Darwinism, can't do it. Darwin himself said you can't do it. And he was right. That's one area where he was right.
Okay.
And basically, the leading Darwinists accepted Darwinism. We name it after him because, of course, he popularized it, because they saw it as a means of achieving the destruction of theism and the establishment of naturalism. Naturalism is the idea that the material world can explain everything.
Okay.
There is no angels, there's no spirits, there's nothing beyond. You're a machine. Your brain is a machine, it's a computer made out of meat. That's how they explain it. There's nothing beyond that. There's nothing beyond the physical brain that you have.
Now, who is Professor Bowler?
Professor Bowler is a leading scholar of Darwin. He's written, probably 12 books just on Darwin. He really does a good job. I have all of his books, and I've read most of them.
Wow.
And I rely pretty heavily upon them because he relies upon the early literature, and he does a good job synthesizing it. But he himself was a Darwinist. He was not a creationist. And his goal was, of course, to convert the scientists. Then the next goal would be to convert the population. And he did that beyond his own expectations. Darwin himself was surprised at how quickly the scientific world, converted to his theory. And he talked about conversion as a convert. He said, well, we converted so-and-so to the way we have of looking at the world.
That's an interesting way to put it, isn't it?
So, well, that's how he put it. He was trying to convert the world. But previously, of course, the natural world was seen as a handiwork of God. And by his theory, he knew that he was committing cultural murder. So again, that word murder comes up in his writing.
Okay.
You could probably do a whole paper just on that one term
Oh, yeah.
that he used. And then he understood that if evolution by descent were true, then the argument from design was dead. And that was what he was trying to do, was kill the argument from design. That's his murder again. And all that went with it. What went with it? Well, the existence of a personal God, free will, life after death, immutability, moral laws, and ultimate meaning in life. So those are all the things he was trying to destroy. Free will we tend to forget about.
Yes.
But he really was stressing that free will is ended if indeed his theory is correct. You behave the way you do as a result of the environment influence on you and your brain cells. And there's no person, there's no self behind that. You're a machine that responds to the world around us and responds to the design. I think Darwin wouldn't use that word, but
Right.
the design of the brain. And so he wanted to eliminate free will. And that surprises people, because that's something that most people feel, well, of course I have free will. I
Right.
decide I want to do this and do that and so on.
But he's contributing everything to the natural.
The natural will.
Everything.
Including free will. We don't have free will.
Okay.
And therefore, why punish criminals? Because what they did was not a result of free will. Free will assumes that when we punish someone, we are responding to what their free will did. And of course, that is not the case according to Darwin.
Hi, I'm David Rives, host of Wonders Without Number. Like what you're seeing? You can find so much more on the Creation Superstore. You'll find over 1,000 books, DVDs, and other quality resources on origin science, creation, and Bible history. Whether you're looking for nature documentaries, educational books, homeschool resources, or children's videos, we've got it all, so be sure to head over and check it out. Use this special promo code to receive 10% off your first order.
And ultimate meaning in life. Now, he recognized meaning, because one scientist said, well, there's meaning in life, I'm hungry, let's have lunch. So that's proximate meaning.
Okay.
But ultimate meaning, he of course rejected. There was
Right.
no ultimate meaning in science. And therefore, the conclusion that no ultimate, let me stress that word, purpose exists in the universe, and that is a logical result of Darwinism, which is held by many, if not most orthodox evolutionists today.
Okay.
You always have evolutionists who equivocate and say, well, there's a God behind it all, and so on, but that's difficult to do. And the end conclusion was, as Richard Dawkins said, the selfish gene. So he, and by the way, he sold millions of copies of this book, The Selfish Gene, and this edition here is the 30th anniversary edition,
Wow.
which is still in print, but basically what he was saying was that we exist for the purpose of our genes. We are gene machines.
Okay.
Genes basically, they keep us going. They motivate us. So we are slaves to the genes. We have selfish genes. The problem with that now is we realize that our genes are only part of the story. We talk about a concert, for example, a symphony orchestra, and it's made up of many, many parts. Well, now we realize the genome is part of an orchestra in the same way it's made up of many parts. And the parts are not just the physical genes, but also controlling factors, epigenetics, control factors that we're now only becoming aware of. So genes are only part of the whole system. They're an important part, but they're only part of it. So without the hardware, the genes, which would be the software, is useless. So it takes both the hardware and the software to produce people. And something beyond that, which I could just briefly mention, an acquaintance of mine, he had a set of twins, which one twin, which he was a doctor for, one of the twins had literally less than half of her brain.
Really?
So one had a complete brain, the other had literally less than half of her brain. And he showed me the x-rays, the CT scans. It showed indeed a huge area was black, and that was where there was no part of the brain.
Wow.
It was not there. And his concern is that indeed will there be a difference between the two as they grow up. And he followed them, and he showed us pictures as they grew up, and now they're adults, they're late 20s, they're both married, they both have master's degrees, they're both doing very well. It's hard to find the difference between the girl who had her full brain and the girl who had half a brain. And he basically interpreted that as, indeed, we are much more than our physical brain.
Yes.
That there's something behind us. The brain is necessary, obviously, but we're a lot more than that. There are many, many parts that go up to make the person. Now, he wasn't denying the pons and the midbrain and so on. These are important. These have control functions.
Sure.
But he's saying that the part of the brain that we normally see as us, gives us our personality, and this one girl wasn't there. And he said, personality-wise, the two girls were both equally successful, did equally well. And to him, and he went beyond this, of course, but to him, it says that we are more than just a brain computer made out of meat, that we're really beyond that. There's a person there, there's a self there. And that's something Darwin denied, and that's something Dawkins denied. There is no person there, there's no self there. And many other examples. One quick one I could give is when my mother had Alzheimer's disease, very devastating disease if you're aware of it. She was totally mute, she said nothing, she had to be taken care of like a a month-old baby. And every now and then she would have periods of clear lucidity. Once when I was there, now she hadn't said anything for months, she said in perfect English, "It is really warm in this room. Could you turn down the heat?"
Really?
Out of nowhere.
Okay.
And we thought maybe now,
Right.
wasn't, but maybe she's out of it, but she wasn't. And in her case, I've concluded mother was still there. She hadn't changed. The person was still there, but she just couldn't get out. And when I mention that to students, they say, "Oh yeah, I've seen that among Alzheimer's patients." They'll come up with perfectly accurate assessments of things. Now, these were people who haven't said a word, or if they have said a word, it's gobbledygook.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, they say things perfectly fluent and relevant to the situation at hand. So that helps me understand that indeed we're not, as Darwin and as Dawkins and others said, we're not just a prisoner of the structure.
Of
we
the
are
brain.
a person that lives and uses, expresses ourselves through that structure. The structure is the mouthpiece. Our person is using that mouthpiece.
Isn't that interesting? It's more than just the brain. It's more than just
brain.
what's there. Huh.
Results of Darwinism, and I'll try to go through that briefly. One of the more interesting parts was his view of women. And he thought, and you can see where he would reason this way, that women were protected. Men went to war and killed the weak. Men fought among themselves and killed the weak. Men did not protect each other, but we protected women. And because we protected women, the weak survived. And because the weak survived, Darwin basically concluded that women are inferior, literally inferior to men, because the weak survive. In body changes, we can see that when a man matures in adolescence, his body changes in many ways.
Yes.
A woman's body changes as well, but not nearly as much. The facial, the body structure is pretty much the same. Development of breasts and the secondary sexual characteristics, of course, but by and large, Darwin, for this reason, saw women as children that never grew up.
Wow. Okay.
And
That's
spent a lot of time covering this, and I cover this a chapter in my book on Dark Side of Darwin.
yes.
And this, what he said when he was thinking about getting married. As a married man, he would be a poor slave, worse than a Negro. But reminisced, one cannot live the solitary life with groggy old age, friendless and cold and childless, staring one in one's face. Darwin concluded there's many happy slave, and shortly thereafter, in 1839, he married his cousin Emma Wedgwood. And he later on said, I might have quoted this, but, and there's Emma. Later on, he said, well, woman is better than a dog anyhow.
That's incredible. We don't hear this about Darwin. I mean, Darwin is looked up to as an icon of science, and yet here we're seeing he is incredibly racist, is incredibly demeaning towards women. There's this dark side that we don't know about.
And talk about sexist. Today he would be, he would probably have 30 women throwing potatoes at him.
Yes.
For what he said. But anyway, there's Emma, and this is the house he had.
Okay.
He had a lot of money, and Emma was a Wedgwood, so he was able to marry into the wealthy Wedgwood pottery factory. So, and he himself was fairly wealthy because Darwin's father, Robert Darwin, was a medical doctor, was quite successful. And he inherited an income from his father and his wife's income. So he never had to work for a day in his life. He could live off of his inheritance.
Okay.
And he invested wisely. So he actually was a good investor. He invested in railroads. He saw that was up and coming, and so he bought a lot of railroad stock, and he did pretty well. That's his study. You can see, and he thought, well, I mentioned this, women were at a lower level of development than men, and he talked about that in a fair amount in some of his writing.
Okay.
And at the time, these views were not those of a small minority, but were the majority view in the late Victorian women. So when people say the Victorian era was sexist, that's really true. It was incredibly sexist.
But a lot of it had to do with some of his
ideas. Now, he didn't originate those, but he sure reinforced them.
Okay.
He enormously reinforced them. Race, talked about that briefly in other talks, but he believed the lower race, which was blacks, would go extinct, and he opposed helping the sick. This is a female Hottentot, and this is a female gorilla. And I haven't seen a gorilla that looks like that, and I haven't seen a Hottentot. And when I was in Africa, I didn't see a Hottentot that looked like that at all.
Right.
So these are artistic license beyond what
misrepresentations.
we would
Okay.
normally think. But in the Terra de Fuego. It's a Spanish term I can't pronounce correctly. My daughter-in-law's Hispanic, so I have to ask her to pronounce it. But
She can do it, yeah.
I have a hard time with. He said, how wide was the difference between savage and civilized man? And he felt the Fuegians from South America were the most abject and miserable creatures he'd ever seen. So not very flattering. But he said in time in the future, not very far in the future, the civilized races of man, Caucasians, will almost certainly eliminate and replace the savage races. And he felt this was natural evolution by natural selection. So he felt this would naturally occur. We can't stop it. It's going to occur. And here he said the civilized races would become extinct, and they would take the place between the apes and the higher races. So between those, the races would become extinct.
Wow.
And that's a good example of what he believed. So.
Okay. If you had 30 seconds to summarize what we've learned today, what would you say about Darwin and his impact?
He had a tremendous impact on many, many people, not only the few things I brought out here, but on racism. Biological racism, by the way, existed before Darwin, but it became much, much greater after Darwin.
Okay.
It justified a lot of racist ideas and racist behaviors. Also, treatment of women was exacerbated as a result of Darwin's ideas. More importantly, though, Darwin influenced so many people like Marx, Lenin, Stalin, and so many other important people in history, even some of the leading Japanese scientists and individuals he influenced, even influenced the Japanese behavior in World War II. So his influence was enormous and widely recognized.
So when you say that he may be one of the most evil men that ever lived, his ideas, which he popularized, became one of the primary reasonings for these murderers like Hitler and Stalin and others.
Hitler was clearly trying to eliminate inferior races. He thought that the world in the future would thank him because he was able to eliminate inferior races, not just Jews, which of course is not a race, but Jews, Slavics, which would be Poles, Russians.
Wow.
And he made it very clear in his later writings. There's a book later he wrote which was never published, but has been published now. And it made it very clear he wanted to make the Slavic slaves and eventually eliminate the Slavic population. And so his goals were pretty horrendous.
That is so incredible. Again, you've written the book, The Dark Side of Charles Darwin, a critical analysis of an icon of science. He is, there's a whole other side that no one knows about. Very few people do. And we appreciate your research in these topics, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Charles Darwin was a troubled individual with an agenda. He was even bold enough to admit as much, but that's not the mark of a true scientist. While there is always bias, science should be about objectively looking at evidence. Darwin's dishonesty is just one attribute of sinful mankind, and nothing more can be expected in this fallen world. But when we receive Jesus, our Messiah, He will provide us with His Holy Spirit to help counter our fleshly nature. You know, if you've reached out to the Lord for salvation after hearing today's message, let us know. We hope that you've been encouraged and educated today, and we want to give you the tools that you need to boldly go forward and share what you've learned, some important information. Leave us questions and comments on our Facebook page and give us a call to learn more. I'm David Rives, and until next time, keep looking up. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God. Hello, I'm David Rives, host of the TV show Creation in the 21st Century on TBN and the Heavens Declare video series. Each week we talk about breaking discoveries in science which reveal that our Creator, the God of the Bible, has left a pattern of His fingerprints throughout the universe. Engage with other like-minded believers through the Creation Club. This website offers thousands of articles written by scores of authors in multiple languages. Sign up to get our free monthly magazine delivered to your door. Want more? Genesis Science Network is our free 24/7 TV network, reaching millions of people around the world on internet, Roku, Fire TV, and mobile devices. Shop over 1,000 books and videos on the Creation Superstore, the world's largest origins-related store. Visit our Wonders of Creation Center and sign up for email updates to have encouraging articles sent straight to your inbox. Like us on Facebook for daily inspiration and education regarding science and the Bible.